There's a moment when you realize the world isn't just unstable, it's incoherent. You can feel it in the way institutions talk to you, like you're a problem to be managed. You can feel it in the way every system you interact with feels brittle, like it's held together with tape and interns. You can feel it in the way nothing feels anchored anymore. Not the news, not the economy, not the job market, not the culture, definitely not the future. And if you're Gen X, you do feel it with a particular kind of clarity. We grew up in a world where institutions still had weight. Schools meant something. Jobs meant something. The news meant something. The government, for all its flaws, still felt like a structure. Now everything feels hollowed out. Like the shell of a building after the tenants have moved out. Just empty. The hollow feeling is not an illusion. It's the sound of the old pillars cracking. Because hierarchy doesn't survive on power alone. Power is fragile. Power is temporary. Power evaporates the moment people stop believing in it. For hierarchy to last, it has to build supports around itself. Supports that make the positions feel inevitable, natural, even moral. These are the 4 pillars. Every hierarchy in history, from the first grain storehouses to the modern nation state, has built the same supports. Not because they copied each other, but because the structure demands it. The first pillar is story. The narrative that answers the most dangerous question in any society. Why them? Why does this family get to store the grain? Why does this leader get to decide the interest rate? Why does this company get to control the platform? The story changes across eras. Divine right, manifest destiny, meritocracy, innovation. But the function is always the same. Narrative is not truth. Narrative is permission. I hope that one sinks in. Narrative is not truth. Narrative is permission. But a story alone is fragile. A story can be doubted. A story can be challenged. So hierarchy, it builds a second pillar, force. Not always violence, though violence is always in the background. Sometimes it's courts, sometimes it's police, sometimes it's surveillance, sometimes it's the quiet threat of losing access to the resource you depend on. Enforcement answers the question, what happens if someone says no? And across 5,000 years, the answer has been remarkably consistent. They won't say no twice. The third pillar is the resource flow, the economic bloodstream that keeps the machine fed. In the ancient world, it was grain, land, and labor. In the industrial world, it was steel, oil, and credit. In the digital world, it's data, attention, and identity. Economics is not about money. Economics is about control of scarcity. When the pie stops growing, the people at the top don't loosen their grip, they tighten it. But the fourth pillar is the most powerful because it lives inside your mind. Belief, religion, patriotism, ideology, the American dream, the myth of meritocracy, the idea that the system is fair, or at least fairish. Belief is what makes obedience feel voluntary. Belief is what makes hierarchy feel natural. Belief is what makes people defend the very structure that exploits them. When belief is strong, enforcement can be small. But when belief collapses, enforcement must grow. These pillars don't stand alone. They lean on each other. The story justifies the force protects the resource flow funds the story, and belief ties it all together so tightly that people forget the structure exists at all. This is how hierarchy becomes self-stabilizing. This is how hierarchy becomes invisible. This is how hierarchy becomes a machine. And once you see the machine, you can't unsee it. You start to notice how every institution you grew up trusting was built on these pillars. You start to notice how every common sense idea you were taught was part of the narrative pillar. You start to notice how every neutral system you interact with was part of the enforcement pillar. You start to notice how every economic rule you thought was natural was actually a design choice. You start to notice how every belief you held about fairness or merit or opportunity was part of the architecture. And then you start to notice something else, something that explains the hollowing feeling so many people have right now. The pillars are cracking. The story doesn't work anymore. The force is inconsistent. The resource flow is unstable. The belief system has collapsed. That's why everything feels unmoored. That's why institutions feel empty. That's why politics feels like theater. That's why the economy feels like a trap. That's why the culture feels exhausted. That's why the future feels opaque. The old pillars are failing, but the new pillars aren't fully built yet. We are living in the gap between architectures. In episode 4, we're going back to the beginning, to the first time these pillars were ever built in the ancient world. Because once you see how the machine was constructed the first time, you'll understand exactly what's happening now as the new machine is taking shape. And some books for this episode, The Four Pillars, that you might want to read are Yuval Harari's Sapiens and Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish. They talk about especially the narrative and the enforcement pillars. Thank you.